Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th Restorative Justice Colloquium. I am Paola Suarez Orozco, a new professor in counseling and school psychology here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I am delighted to briefly frame the conversation today and to introduce our talented discussion panel. I would like to begin by thanking our organizers, Tony van der Meer and Keith Jones, for their phenomenal efforts in organizing this long overdue set of conversations. What a wise choice to center them around Yaa Gyasi's homecoming. This insightful, provocative, tragic, and yet somehow still hopeful novel digs deeply into the lives of compelling protagonists who exemplify the multiple ways in which legacies of colonialism, racism, and structural oppression leave an indelible mark on individual lives as well as whole societies across continents. All of us can learn from reading, discussing, and listening to one another in contemplation of this novel. Whether one has been forced to grapple with these realities in everyday lives, there are lessons and wisdoms in this novel. Whether one embodies a space of privilege, never personally forced to contend with these daily inequities, but on a journey of re-education after moving through an educational system that woefully distorted and invisibilized these legacies. There is yet more to contemplate. No one can engage with this novel and not be deeply moved, and yes, transformed. Today, the focus of our discussion will be identity, culture, and activism. Our focal protagonists today will be Sunny, Marjorie, and Marcus, who capture very different reparative pathways as they navigate the undertows of oppressive legacies so eloquently elucidated in this novel. Let us now turn to their voyages and the implications for all of us as we engage in our own restorative justice journey by turning the conversation to our esteemed panelists. Our panelists include Falian Forges, a UMass Boston junior majoring in English and Africana Studies, Samuel Stevens, a UMass Boston sophomore business management major and a hip hop musician and entrepreneur, Sofia Calvo Palavinci, a daughter of Costa Rican immigrants and a UMass Boston junior who's majoring in history and minoring in both secondary education and Native American and Indigenous studies, Abdullah Beckett, a UMass Boston senior majoring in exercise health science and minoring in Arabic studies, and the vice president of the UMass Boston NAACP chapter, and a member of UMass Boston's inaugural My Brother's Keeper cohort. And Olaninke Ojelabi, I hope I haven't butchered your name, a fourth-year PhD student in public policy at the McCormick Graduate School at UMass Boston, and the vice president of the Pan-African Graduate Student Association. I'm now going to turn over the baton to our moderator, Haley Marsh, a master's student in the Critical Ethnic and Community Studies program here at UMass Boston, and a teaching assistant in the Introduction to Africana Studies. Good evening, and let's enjoy this conversation, and let's learn from one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carola Suarez Orozco, for your opening remarks this evening. We appreciate you joining us in the continuation of this critical conversation. I might also like to thank Professors Tony van der Meer and Keith Jones for hosting this colloquium. Though they do join us tonight, the space has been reserved to center student voices. So in that light, I will be serving as the moderator this evening. Welcome everyone to the 5th installment of the Homegoing Restorative Justice Colloquium, our student-led panel on identity, culture, and activism. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. In his letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. As we begin this conversation, I invite you to reflect on the importance of this dialogue within the current context of the racialized and racist oppression and violence we are experiencing within our nation and within our communities. The national spike in anti-Asian racism reinforces Dr. King's sentiment. The mass shootings in Atlanta, the physical violence and verbal assaults on people of Asian descent, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, and Ahmaud Arbery last summer, and the violence inflicted on Black bodies since, serve as a stark reminder that we must continuously reflect on situations of injustice, voice our disdain for the assault of white supremacist ideology on our communities, and combat the normalization of hate and violence toward people of color. Most importantly, we must stand together in protest of these white supremacist norms in order to enact real and lasting change. This past summer, hundreds of current and former University of Massachusetts Boston students, along with current student organizations, partnered with the UMass Boston Student Coalition to march in the name of justice for Black lives, where they called for the abolishment of racial injustice. This included the call for the university to defund the police, to remove the police presence from our university campus, to actively support students and faculty of color, and to reinvest in the surrounding Dorchester community. The awareness and agency of the student body to advocate for itself and for the campus culture it envisions is crucial to preserving the moral integrity of our university. It is imperative that our students' voices are centered rather than marginalized. In short, this work cannot stop. A commitment to becoming a leading anti-racist and health-promoting public institution means a commitment to listen, a commitment to radical change. It means the active pursuit of eradicating white supremacist values, heteropatriarchal norms, and the structural institutionalized racism ingrained within our university's culture. The population served by UMass Boston is mostly composed of Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian students, many of whom identify as women and gender non-binary folks. A commitment to becoming anti-racist and health promoting cannot merely be a promise. It must be felt. It must reflect in the representation of these populations in the curriculum, in the classroom, in the faculty and staff, in accessibility, and in the validation of our students' experiences. Not long before he was assassinated, Dr. King said, "For years, I labored with the idea of reforming the existing institutions of the South, a little change here, a little change there. Now I feel quite differently. I think you've got to have a reconstruction of the entire society, a revolution of values. In order to have reconstruction, we must first deconstruct and undo. An institution that strives to be a leading anti-racist, health-promoting public institution cannot maintain its current practices. It must look and feel different from other institutions. It must look and feel different from what it was before and has historically been. We must delve into new territory, dismantle and undo in order to innovate and transform ourselves. But we must first shift our values in order to change our practices." Tonight, our student-led panel will focus on identity, culture, and activists. Join me in welcoming the panelists, Falian Forges, Samuel Stephens, Sophia Calvo, Abdullah Beckett, and Olanike Ojalabi. Welcome, panelists. Audience, if you have any questions for myself or the panelists tonight, please type them in the box, and we'll try to get to them throughout the evening. Thank you. Our first round of questions will address the following. How do you position your identity and your participation in these dialogues, given what you've experienced as a student on this campus? What are your reflections? How do we address this question of identity and culture in terms of how it is regarded and respected within this institution and our campus culture?
Thank you. Haley, for addressing that question. I'll allow Sophia to, however, make her announcement prior to my intervention.
Sure. So yeah, I wanted to provide a brief land acknowledgement. Excuse me. So we wish to acknowledge that UMass Boston is occupying the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Pawtucket and other Massachusetts First Nations. We pay respect to the elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We also pay respects to the African lives which were forcibly brought here or lost during the Middle Passage, individuals who were stripped of their language, religion, families, culture, and names in the name of colonialism and assimilation. By no means is this acknowledgement an immediate or sole solution to undoing colonialism. A closer observation into the social and structural conditions surrounding the Native American diaspora and Black American diaspora is necessary to find concrete solutions. Wherever you may be viewing or broadcasting from, please take time to acknowledge the presence of your local Indigenous peoples and settler colonial history and how to undo systems of oppression in your region. And finally, to look inward within yourselves to undo prejudices you have unconsciously learned by a system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. In taking that moment, I look at even the background that I come from. I think in every space that I've been in, either part of my identity, various parts of my identities have influenced the way that I've engaged, and then what I've been able to pinpoint, I think, coming in when I look at why I'm here. In every space I've identified, I've been in a role that's been able to make sure that someone looks like me that is in the room, make sure that I'm able to disrupt as well as help transform those spaces and improve them. I am of Haitian descent, I'm Afro-Caribbean. I'm a Boston resident, Mattapan resident, the equivalent to Little Haiti. I think part of my role in being here at least is building that structural or global understanding that allows me to convey and expand my knowledge of the world to others. And I think when we do one, especially beginning with that acknowledgement, is incredibly important to the way we understand and function in each space we engage. I think that when my experience came to interact with organizations on campus, I wondered, well, what was I supposed to be doing there? And it dawned on me only later why. I think even when it comes to historical interpretation, I understood like the way that my parents fought to get me here. I understood what liberation looked like in terms of my nation. I understood that Haiti is still fighting for the freedom that we declared in 1804. I understood that I had different colonial experiences based on how I was taught to see the world and how my peers were taught to see the world. And I say convey because most often in our situation, our circumstances will limit what we know, and then we're unable to either carry that into another circumstance or understand a structural problem because its face or location has changed. I identified that even recently when it came to the death of George Floyd, being that was what made many people address structural racism on campus with me, which I felt was an inadequate approach. It essentially came in a way that was much more negative than their interpretation had been. And so when I look at, well, why as a Black female student is it important? Why as a child of the diaspora was it important? I'm reminded constantly my experiences aren't events, but have those structural roots. And it's encouraging to engage in these conversations where folks were able to look at them in a way that they were forced to confront, critically analyze, were forced to engage them. And a lot of that time, that conversation was sparked in literature, but not sparked through personal testimonies where students said, here's what I have experienced. I found that interesting in the way that the conversation functioned, because it was very difficult then to explain, well, this is not only a novel, this is explaining everything. This is explaining the way that our worlds function and the way that you, and even within Jones's class, we talked a lot about the proverb at the start that explains why your placement and your positionality is incredibly important to what you see, what you understand, what you know, that how you approach knowledge. And so within my various positions, I'd serve as an ESL tutor, a resident assistant, coming from Boston Native. And I understand that even in every department I serve, none of them were immune to the problems of structural racism. And yet their understanding of what their roles were was trying to create a profitable campus community through which that understanding forfeited or sacrificed the meaning of creating a campus culture that confronted where and who we are. I think that when we have those discussions about structural violence as they pertain to experiences that myself and my peers had on campus that we explained had been either violent, traumatizing, that had symbolic and material implications that even our departments had refused to address. They were incredibly frustrating to navigate, and in understanding why then I began to and continue to engage in those conversations was to work out strategies and solutions, to train, to know that it was a training ground or an experience. It wasn't a moment. And this was not solely to address anti-racism or to understand anti-Blackness and whiteness, because I've been in too many spaces that have had me sitting in the room just to check off that I was in the room, but not to take my input. So when I say I'm not only here to address, but to keep working at that commitment to disrupt the way the violence functions, and to transform and invest in becoming, while unraveling what it means to be in those spaces, I'm engaging in that fight, that continual process. And I say that's a fight that we had to bring to the university, since it continuously got swept under the rug in the spaces that I was in. So then my role in undoing racism is being trained and training, and my mission in participating and educating others and implementing strategies we come up with this, because I believe firmly, like, to be an educated society is to be a prosperous one. I don't mean that in a business model sense, which many of my department heads thought, in which we pursue whether this campus as well. Here's what we understand about students, and looking at them as just another number. I think in identifying the problem with that, we were needing to build a legacy that interrogated the work, to lower those roadblocks and continue to fight to address that internalization, both within the department and within other individuals such as myself. So I think that understanding that's one, that the system isn't benefiting anyone, to hold the university accountable to what they're doing, to hold ourselves accountable, to confront systemic issues and not events. I wanted folks to be committed not to addressing this particular event or this particular moment. And I don't say that in a flippant way, because again, Black people weren't surprised when the past summer happened. It was already an understanding that we approached this with. And so many of the issues that we observed, we were like, these were already prevalent. They're only now prevalent to another individual whose lived experience that is not. But I think largely is my role in bringing that conversation to light and engaging in that. So I'll stop there, because I definitely went over time. My apologies. Continue.
Thank you for that. You said a lot of things that I agree with. In terms of the question, my experience on the campus has been very limited. I got to the campus fall 2019, and we left spring 2020, because of COVID. But from what I did get to experience outside of Professor Jones's class in the spring of 2020, I noticed a lot just getting off at JFK. Getting off at JFK to step onto the bus, to ride over to school. I noticed a lot of white faces and a lot less faces that look like me, or look like, the brown and Black people that I know from my community. There were very little people of Latino or Latinx descent. And I wasn't used to that. I come from high school where a lot of the kids look like me. A lot of the people look like me. We come from very similar backgrounds. Me, myself, being born of two Jamaican immigrants who, ended up becoming citizens. I'm used to culture. Not to insinuate that America doesn't have a culture, but I'm around my culture all the time, whether it's being at home with Jamaican culture or being, around other Black and brown people where we talk about Black culture. I'm used to being around my culture a lot. And when I get on the bus, I kind of feel like I have to silence my culture. Even to, the music I would listen to. I'm a rapper. I'm a musician. I've been doing that for some years now. So I listen to rap all the time. And when I get on the bus, I feel like I have to turn my music down. Or I'm a person who likes to rap my lyrics out loud, but I feel like I can't do that, and that bothered me being at school. When I would finally get to the campus and get off, obviously I would get around to seeing, Black and brown folks, but what was still overwhelming was the amount of white faces that could still be seen. And I just still didn't feel like my culture was on this campus. And I was a little sad that it felt like we had to exist in our own little worlds within these clubs or within these small subgroups. Not that the groups are problematic, but I never felt like and I could be wrong, but I never felt like my white counterparts had to worry about meeting up with themselves or meeting amongst themselves in groups because they see themselves so much. So I stopped looking at the groups as like, okay, let me just, chill among my people. I was like, no, I don't like that, because when it comes to our culture as Black people and Black and brown people, hip hop in particular is the biggest genre in the world right now. Statistically, is the biggest genre in the world. It's the most consumed type of music. That's us, which means odds are there are a lot of those white kids on campus that are definitely listening to our culture. Do they understand it? It could be argued that some do and some don't. But if we are having a culture that is created by us that a wide variety of people are consuming, then that means my culture should be appreciated on this campus. And I didn't feel like it was. And after speaking with Professor Jones, finally in the spring semester, I started to feel like, you know what? I see a problem here on this campus. Let me help to change that. I had a vision of, bringing hip hop into the school, but not just because it's fun. I wanted to bring it into the school to be educational for hip hop or any form of arts to be displayed on campus and treated with the same respect that a play by Shakespeare would be treated with the respect. I noticed that we had a lot of these performance halls, and I was like, I don't see a lot of Black kids in this performance hall. I don't see a lot of Hispanic kids in this performance hall. And why do you have so many if they're not going to be used by everyone? I feel like although as a people in this country, we are a quote unquote minority, our culture has been the majority and remains the majority of what dominates in America and what dominates in our schools and what dominates everywhere. And I want my culture to not just exist as an intangible thing, but I wanted it to become a tangible thing in our school. And I still have that vision that it could happen. But I think that's how I looked at my culture. Everything that my counterpart had just said, in terms of being an activist and making changes, I've realized that my niche and my place to fit into this change puzzle is to do it through the arts and to help with other people who, may not, be, hands-on learners, but can learn through seeing and learn through hearing. I would like to provide a way that, people can not only become more educated in their culture or in our culture, but feel like they are a part of it and feel like, oh, am I over time?
Yes, thank you. We do appreciate your statement.
I got you.
Yeah, so going over to Sophia, we just want to remind, panelists to be conscious of time, but we thank you so much for your insights. It's very rich so far. Continuing, thank you, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I'm so sorry that there was a time crunch because I could be here all night listening to you speak honestly, and Falian as well. But so my experience on this campus has been a continuation of facing the truth of my identity. And like everybody else, I'm sure, including the characters Sony, Marjorie, and Marcus in Homegoing, I'm sort of the living current result of historical processes, which include colonialism, migration, assimilation, and a lot of others that I probably will never be aware of. My entire life, I was uncomfortable with being called or identified as white because I've always identified as Latina. I grew up in a Spanish household, and there were also some Native American aspects in terms of Costa Rican, such as the Bribri and the Chorotega tribes. But in my experience at UMass Boston, and especially within the recent year, I've learned that I have learned and that I have been allowed to witness experiences of others in the Latinx community, including Black Latinx, and that, in denying my whiteness, I deny the experience of Black Latinx. And also, I come from a place of privilege because I am a white Latina. Although my family has always dangled, into like the lower middle class, I have to work to help my mother. And I have been discriminated upon the discovery of my culture, my ethnicity, and my gender. I am still privileged. I'm privileged because my whiteness, my citizenship, and my education make it so. However, being privileged, I've learned, is not all about the things that you have, and it's more so about which obstacles are not present. In my life, I do not have anything, mostly anything, that I don't believe that is preventing me from living. So in a white person's life, I believe, or in whiteness, it's difficult to identify what barriers might not be there, as opposed if you listen and you are allowed to observe, the experiences of the Black community and such. This whole experience with George Floyd, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, this has been ongoing. This has been ongoing since, I believe, for as long as we can remember. It goes all the way back to the Black Panther movement. We have seen it with Colin Kaepernick, and it's had its revival with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And as Falian had mentioned before, is that this has always been an experience that some people are just now beginning to realize, and it's no surprise to the Black community. So I suppose, and also connecting it to Samuel's discussion, is that there's been a huge silencing of culture. And I absolutely felt that, because in my own, Latina-ness and in my own nativeness, I've been told that, well, you don't look like that, you don't sound like that, and you definitely may not dance like that and whatnot. And so there is a sense of, we should no longer be silencing culture, and that we should be confronting directly racism. And I believe that that's the direction that UMass Boston should go, in creating a culture that is embracing and acknowledging all of the different cultures, experiences, and endeavors that each student has, and that being the collective identity that we see on campus. And to see racism and discrimination and sexism and everything else as something that we can absolutely undo, not only on campus, but also within our communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, Falian, and Samuel. I think one of the main points I got from what everyone has said so far is that our experiences don't differ much. Like Samuel said, I too came from a high school that was extremely mainly African-American, right? I went to high school with about 5 white kids for the whole time. So one of the things that really pushed me to go to UMass Boston was diversity. I still wanted to be around people who looked like me, but I still knew that in order to, live in society, that I'd had to get experience living with, being around other cultures and working with them. And when I got to UMass Boston, it was extremely eye-opening when I realized one of the first things I said to myself this is diversity, because you see a lot of white faces, right? You see a lot of white faces, and you see some Black faces, but they're mainly white. And so I'm thinking, what are other colleges like? If this is what diversity looks like. And with that, you still have that ignorance that is very strong within UMass Boston. Sometimes it can feel like UMass Boston feels that they've reached a diversity quota, so they forget about other aspects of what diversity truly is. And you can look at faculty. I've had maybe 2 Black professors in my 4 years I've been at this university, And I feel like it can't be truly diverse if it's a bunch of diverse students learning from white faculty, you know? And with that, like I said, it just perpetuates ignorance. I'm the vice president of the NAACP on campus, and our mission statement is essentially to promote racial equity on campus and to speak up for those voices who feel unheard. And in our early days, we had an instance where we had a student who came to us and felt that and was discriminated against. She tried to do a study, and the study was on hair, and she had kinky hair. And when she wasn't told that, you had to have straight hair for this study. And she was turned down very rudely once she took her bonnet off, right? And she felt like it was rude, and the professors just kicked her out. So we forced a conversation. We didn't ask for a conversation. We demanded one, because we can't allow that to happen, right? And so one of the things that came up in that conversation that we did have was how little our professors, our non-Black professors, how little they think about race, or how little they think about the diversity that UMass Boston, stands for or supposed to stand for. And I think my work and what I want to, before I leave this campus, what I want to change is to have UMass Boston stop talking the talk and walk the walk. Have them actually become and do what they say and stand by becoming and promoting an anti-racist, campus. And it's important that we do that in order to make a change that so many campuses have. So many campuses have problems when it comes to racism. I remember, I believe it had to be 2018, there was a wave of racist things happening in Massachusetts on campuses where N-words were being written all over dorms. I never heard UMass Boston having that problem, which is, kudos to UMass Boston. But if we really want to be leaders, and I think we're in the position to be leaders, we have to do more, and we have to act on things. We have to be bigger. I think I'll end there. I don't want to take up time, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you, Faliani. Thank you, Samuel, and thank you, Abdullah. Everyone has touched on pretty much the things that I would have, highlight again, but I would pretty much highlight my experience as a graduate student and my experience as an immigrant. So first of all, my coming to UMass Boston, I think Abdullah mentioned that one of the reasons that attracted him to UMass was the diversity. The same was for me. The diversity of the student population is one of the things that attracted me to UMass Boston. But now, and speaking relatively to where I was coming from Worcester State University, was more, UMass Boston is more diverse than where I was coming from. So that sense of diversity was something that attracted me to UMass Boston. But then it was almost immediately obvious that this was more paramount among the undergraduate student body. In the graduate student body, it was immediately obvious that there was no diversity. There are many programs where there's just maybe one or so student of color. And while there is a broad range of students from different countries, so like my program has a number of students from a variety of nations, but there is the lack of diversity in terms of the native Black and Latinx population. Also, I want to also highlight that joining UMass Boston and seeing the things that I saw when I first got there in my first year was the motivation that drove me into community engagement at UMass Boston. So my first year, I joined the student advisory body. And as a student in that student advisory board, we would talk about a number of things to see to the growth of the student body. Many of our conversation led to changes in the dining, changes in the campus, in the on-campus accommodation. But there were still things that needed to be changed. There were still obvious situations on campus that needed to be changed. In addition to that engagement, I was also, I'm currently the vice president, as mentioned earlier, of the Pan-African Graduate Student Association. I'm a member of the MICOMA Graduate School of Racial Equity Task Force and an ambassador for the MICOMA Dean of Student Success Initiative. All of this, I highlight all of this engagement to suggest that I've been relatively involved on campus and can speak to some of the changes that need to happen. And some of these conversations we've been having has been leading to potential change and some tangible equity and inclusion efforts, which I would highlight later. Talking a little more about my identity and culture and how it plays a role in how it has helped to shape my work so far. So I'm a native of Nigeria and I consider myself a recent immigrant. For me, understanding Black and Blackness and Black consciousness was so new to me. So I came here as an immigrant myself, and within a few years, I was not so conscious of what was happening. I came with high hopes, with high expectations, the dream, the American dream, and all of that. And then my journey into getting into Black consciousness and racial consciousness took a while, with changes in my life event, with changes like marriage and childbearing. So after I had my children, and I became more and more conscious. I became super conscious of the things that were happening around me for some reason, and particularly the deep racial structure and the other systemic decadence in our society today. And most importantly, the implication this whole thing has on my family. I became conscious of what my husband would wear when he's going out. I became conscious of, where I take my kids and all of that. I just want to highlight that this realization happened in 2017. And some of the events that happened in 2017, if we can remember, I believe heightened this understanding of racial consciousness. In 2017, if we remember very well, that was when we had the Trump travel ban. There was a lot of police brutality cases towards Black people, gun violence, stringent immigration policy, hostility towards immigrants. And somehow I just felt like this nation that seems to open its hands and calls itself a nation of immigrants is simply like almost the opposite of what it calls itself to be. It was a period that was very challenging for me. I don't know how else to describe it. It was super challenging, realizing that individual social construction as being Black, that the social construction of being Black, once you're constructed as being Black, then you tend to suffer the most, whether or not you did anything to warrant it. So knowing that your good behavior or your deeds will not necessarily exonerate you from the consequences of being Black. So Black becomes the offense, gave me a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. I struggled with understanding who am I? All I've known myself to be is simply a human being who originates from, the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria in West Africa. Now, coming to identify as being Black and the consequences that comes with being Black was a whole new thing for me. Reading Homegoing in many ways have helped to validate this feeling. So more like I'm giving you a reflection of what Homegoing has done to me. It has helped to validate some of the feelings that I had when I came here and my experiences at UMass as being Black, the only Black student in my class. And sometimes I'm walking the floor and, you see only your faces around. So especially the confusion, and I think I relate more with Marjorie from the Homegoing, especially the point where I think it's in page 223, when she was confused about being African American. That's that kind of feeling that I began to have. I began to try to understand, where do I place in the system, where and unfortunately my being a student at UMass Boston as I then did not help much in understanding how to construct and understand my identity. There was really nothing else that I could associate with on UMass Boston that would help to better understand. The curriculum was not helping. There was really nothing much that was helping me to understand this new identity that I was going through. But I want to end on a good note before we pass it on to the next person, is that it was rewarding. It was a very demanding period, very, very tough period, but it was rewarding because that Black consciousness motivated me to focus on my research. And I began to look at political participation of African immigrants. I felt like having a voice, amplifying voices, regardless of what population you identify, amplifying that voice would make a change. So I decided to focus on political participation of African immigrants. As we go on, I would talk about some of the tangible things that I've seen in UMass Boston that I want us to take a look at in this discussion. Thank you. Back to Ellie.
Thank you, Nike. And thank you to all the panelists so far for sharing your perspectives. In the interest of time, let's just move on to our next question. But I'll ask the panelists to please try to condense your responses to about 3 minutes each, just to make sure we can hear from everyone before we'll need to move on to small groups. So for our second round, we'd like you all to address the following questions. Given the university's recent commitment to becoming a leading anti-racist and health-promoting public institution, why are conversations like these important to the process of achieving that goal? From your perspective, what do you see as the tangible solutions for moving forward in order to transform our institution into a leading anti-racist and health-promoting public institution? What needs to be done in the short term and what needs to be done in the long term? And how do we hold the university accountable? So Faliani, please.
Thank you. For me, when I'm looking at the importance of conversations like this towards breaking down barriers, towards understanding what racism, anti-Blackness, whiteness, how they're negatively affecting us all, I think that I've looked at the ways that it has opened the eyes of students that have never engaged this conversation before, important to educating us in a way that's forcing people to engage the connections between literature and our real lives. While everyone read a fiction book, this was, again, like I said, the first time for many. Second, I'd say we need departmental security for when it comes to the organization, when it comes to the support of having conversations like these and making sure they continue. I think that I've looked at the way that the lack of presence, the lack of support, when it comes to faculty, when it comes to students, the silencing and the devaluing of their work. Jones and Vandermeer did this for free. That's the first thing. Tenure Jones and Vandermeer, run them their bread because they did this and orchestrated this space. And if you don't tenure them, you're anti-Black. When I'm looking at what giving us a platform means and making space and breaking down those walls, I want us to address what it means to rebrand and not just take the title of being an anti-racist health promoting institution, a name that the university had to be pressured into taking a stance they did not want at first to declare themselves as. I'm seeing there's so much more that needs to be understood and addressed, even when it comes to Sam's point earlier about when you walk off the bus and you just see JFK and you just see this is what you see. I also look at, well, what does rebranding look like in what we show our students? During orientation, the video that I saw was of Back Bay. I'm from Boston. The Boston that I live in was not the video that I saw. When I look at even the point that Abdullah made earlier when it comes to being about that action, I'm like, pretty sure Marshawn Lynch did this. UMB is not about that action. They weren't before and are trying to get there now. But again, even in that, it is a lot of speech and I don't need another committee. I need actual structural changes. One of which I think, for example, the Cipher in Leadership in Education Department at UMass Boston is trying to do the same thing in getting support for BIPOC faculty. And I'll drop 2 links in the chat actually that I hope everyone will look into because we're here to hold our university accountable to support work like this to continue. My experience at UMass Boston would have been drastically different had it not been for professors like Jones, Vandermeer, Professor Jemedari Kamara, Dr. Max Shelton, Professor Azonia, who's no longer here with us in the department, but they deserve the security for all that they do. Thinking about firmly believing why education is so important. I said before, an educated society is a prosperous one. For us, UMass Boston needs to stop pretending like we're, to understand that being in your business is being in an anti-racist, is promoting that anti-racist business. If you're gonna crunch numbers and reduce the students to a numbers, at least add it right. Racism is costing you more money than it is to perpetuate than it would be to start doing the undoing work. You're losing money purposely. For example, the students that were expelled at the start of the semester during this at the last summer, because they were exposing racist tweets, for example, right after the death of George Floyd. I was like, there are people on campus that you haven't fired that have done much more than that. And yet this was a space to educate them, and yet students, they weren't brought into this space. They were expelled before they even got here. They were sent back to the very communities that created the understandings that they had, that posted those in those group chats. Every silent group chat that's saying racial slurs is gonna continue because they're not here. Yeah. I will say that, one, also stop pretending like you're not in Boston. Stop saying Peninsula. You're in Boston. You're at Dorchester Ave, right there. Morrissey Boulevard, right there. I live in Mattapan. This is less than 30 minutes away. I hop on the train every morning, and the 21 and the red line got me here. So engaging in the community means fashioning a relationship that's not artificial. It means don't pretend like we are different. It means when your tuition values are aligning with the property values, it means your campus should understand that we're in the middle of a foreclosure crisis. Your campus should understand the impact that is having on Boston. Your campus should understand the implications of being within here and benefiting from state money and being in the middle of here, while not being, oh, we're near Harbor Point and Peninsula. No, you're right next to, you're in Dorchester. That's where you are. That's what your zip code, you're 02125. That's what you are. And again, to reiterate, tenure Vandermeer and Jones. Thank you.
Yeah. Yo, you just black, yo. But I get it. I completely understand. I think, one of the things that she just touched on was there's schools in Dorchester. I've lived in Dorchester my whole life. I've been to UMass Boston when I was like a fourth grader. It didn't feel like Dorchester though. Why does it not feel like Dorchester? I have no idea. Maybe because what I see when I leave the house is not what I see when I go to school. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you have kids that are in Dorchester that might not even know that they're in Dorchester, like you have Black counterparts that are coming to the school who probably the night before had a shooting outside their home. Well, we're coming from communities where even to try to do things the right way, to stay positive, still has consequences. It's like, as a school, as an institution, you need to acknowledge that. My culture, for the simple fact that I'm from Boston and I'm from Dorchester, it shouldn't look that different. It shouldn't look that different. We shouldn't treat it like because our school's on the coastline that, oh, that's an entirely different section of the city. It's like, nope, it's a stone throw up the street from South Bay. We have the opioid epidemic happening right up the street of South Bay, but these kids don't know that. Like, that's a problem to me. And I would say, in terms of how I'm looking at things, some of the things that I need to see, or let me back up. The reason why a conversation like this is important is because I had a teacher just now, after I was finished speaking, sent a message and, said that she appreciates me sharing my experiences and sharing, the things that I've seen on this campus. I think that honestly, these are important so that we can learn from each other, in ways that we normally would not. Like how I mentioned, when we're on that bus, nobody's talking to each other. If you're talking to somebody, you're friends with them. If you're looking at the screen that's on the bus, it's not like no Black art that you're seeing on the screen. It's not a music video from Beyonce, Black is King. It's not anything that represents like the fact that we are capable of greatness. And I think that's some of the stuff that needs to change. I think what the school should consider doing, one of the things they should consider doing is making Black film or some kind of Black study an actual requirement. I shouldn't have to learn about European history from the time I'm in elementary school up to college, and your history is somehow more important than mine is. I don't agree with that, because I feel like, especially in American history, you wouldn't have an American history if it wasn't for Black people. So you need to treat me with the respect that I need. Like, if you're going to talk about Black power, Black history, Black whatever you want to talk about, don't just talk about it in February. Make sure that we're talking about it when it's March. Make sure we're talking about it in May. Make sure we're talking about it in September. I rest my case.
Phew. All right. So coming up after the great Falion and the great Samuel, I think that is very difficult, but in consideration of time, I'm going to try and keep this short and make it like a watered down version of theirs, of course, because their voices absolutely do matter. And I just want to touch on how the overarching theme of like, and keeps on coming back, of diversity, and how diversity is really it's such like it's a myth created by like settler colonialism, you know, just to say that, all right, everybody gets their little piece, and look, we'll make it look nice. We'll make it look pretty on the pamphlets. We'll make it look pretty on the brochures or whatnot. But in reality, this is what we're facing. And it's not only about creating awareness of diversity, it's more so about creating an awareness of the discourse of our students' experiences. And especially, I believe that having more interventions, as Falion had mentioned before, with those students who had gotten expelled before they even touched base on campus to learn anything, is that if UMass Boston wants to make a difference and wants to actually lead, then something different has to be done here. We can't keep sending these students away to go back to their town and say, look what this college did to me because of my freedom of speech. And then we just get broken to the cycle. And I also want to touch base on Samuel's point of how it's completely attainable to still be segregated. This is still a segregated institution because of the point that he made, that his history and other people's histories are not required. We have the international, we have the world diversities for graduation and whatnot. However, that still counts to just, European Shakespearean history. Make it a requirement that African history and that a Black diaspora history and that a class like race, gender, and class, like Keith Jones's class, is supposed to be necessary, because it absolutely is. Thank you.
Just like Sophia did, I'm going to try to keep things short because, we have rock stars on this panel. One of the biggest issues that I have, I briefly touched on it, is UMass Boston talking a lot, but not doing. For example, let's take the police on our campus. We don't want them there, right? Our Black students, we don't feel comfortable with them. I don't know a single Black student that has not been harassed by campus police, including myself, for doing nothing. I was parking my car and I've been harassed, right? And I'm tired of, we'll have a board. A board does not scare the police because people are still harassed. We need to stop talking, and we need to start doing. And we need to start forcing our campus to do. We need to start forcing education. There are things that, just like Sophia just mentioned, why isn't an Africana Studies class important? My first Africana Studies class I took my junior year. And it wasn't because I was forced, it was because, this is what I felt like I needed to learn. But why aren't white students feeling like they need to learn about, other diversity and other cultures? And also, we just need to give our Africana Studies department the respect they deserve. The best professors I've had, my first professor was Dr. Max Shelton. She is amazing. She is absolutely amazing, right? Why aren't they treated? Why don't they have security Why don't they have the security in their positions? Why is Africana studies or just treated like an option? It should not be an option. You cannot claim to be a diverse campus and then make diversity an option or learning about diversity an option. I personally, I'm completely over talking and performative things from our campus, and I'm ready to force, and I'm ready to demand, I'm ready to scream and bother anybody that I have to in order until we get what we need to make our campus better. Our campus should be and has the ability to be one of the best campuses for African, Latinx, or any other culture. Make them feel safe, make them feel welcome, make them feel like they deserve to be here. We have that ability, and now it's about time for us to start forcing the issue. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm just going to kind of like put everything we've said together into 3. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to let everyone know we're going to be running a little over, but please, Nikki, please.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So I'm going to kind of consolidate everything we've said into 3 main points. So, and again, this point is around my reflection of my campus experience. The first thing for me, the 3 main things that are of concern for me is that we need some ways to consolidate racial and equity effort on campus. There is so much silo work here and there, department doing theirs. In my school, for instance, we have something called MRATE, which I'm a part of, an agenda such as increasing hiring among faculty, staff, and students of color, diversifying the curriculum for both graduates and undergraduates. I can imagine similar stuff also applies in other departments. So imagine us working together instead of in silos so that we can, because the way that we are working right now, the model that I call it a model, whatever that means, the model that we are operating with right now allows us to end up competing against one another rather than collaborating to bring the change that we so desire on campus. That's my first point. The second point that pulls together everything we've been saying is that what I see around campus is that the burden of change in this structure tends to fall more on the people that are oppressed, tend to fall more on the group that are oppressed. That for me is so painful. I get all these emails to join this group. We need to share the responsibilities to remedy the structural injustices here on our campus. It should not be the burden of predominantly faculties of color, students of color, and staff of color. It should be a joint effort, a shared responsibility to remedy these injustices. My being in Professor Jones' class has helped me. I'm a TA in that class, and that in itself has opened my eyes to a number of things. So if we can make it the burden, if we keep making this a burden of people who are already burdened, of the people who are already group that are already oppressed, what we are doing indirectly is that we are taking away from them the time and resources that they can invest in other critical aspects of their academic career or pursuit. For instance, time to prepare and get tenured, which I think Faliani continues to emphasize. If a professor has to continually be consumed with activism work that could be supported by other groups, but has not been supported, then that professor is being burdened and certain things are taken away from that professor, which might indirectly affect them getting tenure, because then they spend less time on these things. And also for students, it might take away from the time for finishing their graduate program. So the university should encourage everyone to share in this responsibility. It's not the work of the oppressed to continue to fight for their liberation. The last thing is the curriculum, which I think we all touched on by emphasizing that the way the program is structured right now, the way our campus is structured and our curriculum is structured, it prioritizes certain courses over another. For me, I understand that some programs on campus are already including my program, they're already teaching and incorporating racial justice courses into their curriculum. However, we can do more. If, as an institution seeking to distinguish ourselves in this area, we cannot shy away from teaching race-related courses. We cannot shy away from discussing conversations in our classroom and challenging deep-held beliefs and assumptions about ourselves and our society. I would lastly add that collaborating with relevant departments, which I had no idea that many of you would mention, collaborating with relevant departments such as Africana Studies Department to re-examine our existing curriculum, to develop new ones should be seriously considered. We should stop trying to develop things when we have a department on campus that this is what they do. They know this best. In my few just this semester that I'm TAing for this class, I've learned so much. I've learned so much about this ingrained system, not just about how it operates in the US, but even the lasting implication it has on the diaspora African population and continent. So to wrap up all of this, I want to end with this note that we need to elevate student voices like we're doing now. We need to encourage and engage everyone to participate. Don't overburden our population of color with the task of changing a structure that is unjust, a system that they did not create. And lastly, we should be true to the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Beyond the letters, like Abdullah said, let the action of UMass Boston, let it speak for itself. It's not about what we write down, it's about our actions. Let the actions speak for itself. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Right. Thank you, panelists, so much for sharing your experiences, your observations, your suggestions for moving forward. As you all have said, there's so much work to be done. A commitment is just the beginning, and now we need to see the follow through, and we will hold the university accountable. We have so much power for what we envision for our university and for its culture, and what needs to change. I look forward to continuing this fight with you all until this vision is realized. And with that, I'd like to thank you all again, Professors Tony Vandermeer and Keith Jones. And I'd like to invite everyone to move into the small group conversations. The link is in the box there. Please join us over there in our Zoom conversation there. This Zoom call will be closing.